See, I don't keep track of it. I just look at my little meter, and all of a sudden I realize this meter is not accurate anymore. I had reset it. So here's what I needed to do. I made up the bulkhead, which of course is the fit that we're looking for in the back here. And I'm just going to backtrack a little bit because this is one of the things we don't want to skip. That's a nice tight fit in there. The idea is to space the holes as big of a footprint as possible. If you can get the footprint, in other words, you wouldn't want to put the two screws right in the middle. Here's what happens is the bigger you make the footprint, the more torque you can transmit. As you bring this in closer and closer, it's a problem. So getting these in the four corners as far out as possible, that's step one. Now I had rough cut this out, leaving it oversized, but I wanted to get the blind nuts as close to the corners as possible. That of course was one of the goals that I had. And when I cut this piece out, now this is one of the things that'll just make this kind of a job real easy. If you've ever done this and you go to line up 4 holes and you drill 4 holes, mark them with a pen, and you go drill them, they never line up. It's always one of them is a little crooked. But the way I had done this, and in the past I found this worked great, is drill 1 hole, put one of the blind nuts in. Once you put the blind nut in 1 hole, tighten it down, just hand tighten it. Now this gives you the alignment for the other 3. Now you can go to the drill press, drill them all out 110, take it apart, drill the blind nuts out 135, and what happens is, and this is going to be one of our take apart features that we don't want to have compromised. And when these all go in together nice and smooth, we have a little drop of oil on the blind nuts. I don't want to have any interference here, or I certainly don't want to have any sloppiness. And I want to have these blind nuts nice and tight. But for right now, this is one of the key parts, because I'm taking up the thickness right here of the 16th plywood. So when I go to install this, I put it on upside down. No, I just had this in backwards, but it's so accurate by doing it this way, you can turn it around, and that's what makes it difficult. But see, this part has a lip. Now the lip goes down inside. And you can see here are the things that are important is we need a nice tight notch there. Nice and tight, but yet I want some clearance. This side looks like I could use a little more clearance because this part is going to get attached to the wing. So when I go to slide that in, I need to have some clearance. I don't want to push it down and spread this open. Also, I have the biggest footprint possible for this part, and I've connected the box in the back. I haven't left any open spots. So from that angle, that's going to be fine. That's going to act as a nice little reinforcement until we trim it. Looking at this from a lot of different ways, it's a nice tight fit there, that's for sure. You can hold apart by that. So I'm looking for little clearance issues. This looks like one right here. I could use a little more clearance on this side, just a few swipes of the sandpaper, and we'll be ready to put that bulkhead in place. Now just to avoid that little the little error that I just made in putting it on backwards, we won't be able to do that much anymore, but right now this line will tell me, just like lining up a foam wing, when that line is in alignment, I can't have it upside down and I can't have it backwards, at least for now. That's my little indicator. Well, one of the things that I like to get done is right early in a program like this, get these little fits. In other words, this part, I'm going to have to take this apart, put it together hundreds of times in the construction of the plane. And I really paid the price in getting the screws in an accurate location, so every time it goes in, it isn't a little twisted or crooked or whatever. And also, that I know there's just the clearance that the paint is going to make on this. And sometimes it's just a few swipes, but I can tell how much it's going to be. Now, if you're ever in doubt, you can just lay out a piece of masking tape where the paint, it'll take the thickness of where the paint should be, and it kind of, well, in a roundabout way, it'll let you allow for that clearance. And once I glue this part in, then from that point on, we have the nose should be starting to what I call complete the box. And this is the key part, and this is the part that's going to come apart, back together, come apart, back together. When we actually install a wing in here, this is going to be a major functional structural part of the plane. So I did not want to skimp and try to take some shortcut. And what I'm going to do when these screws actually go in for the last time, and these will be, I'll make some special washers exactly this shape. Now, the reason I don't want to make them right now because they're going to have cuts on one end and radius on this side. And I have that washer maker that Midgley sent. Just, I don't need them right now. I can just tighten these by hand, but they will be washers under it. And I've always used aluminum screws as the take apart features make. The aluminum screws have never given me a problem so far. Now with this part, that notch holds it in perfect alignment. And I'm just giving myself a little pencil edge to work off, because I need to take the back piece out when I glue this in. Now you can imagine what would happen if you try gluing this and this piece is bolted in place. You almost guaranteed have just made yourself a no take apart plane. And I have done it. I have been so careful, and all of a sudden I went to take the thing. Forget it. Always take the part out. It was very cool. I just heard from Warren Walker, and they're up in New England, and they are having absolutely the best weather and the best time. Went out to Cape Cod. Man, oh man. And we are going up to Vermont in, I think, 3 or 4 days. I got to check. But we're all thinking about winter is coming. Now, the last thing I'm going to do tonight before I put this puppy to sleep, I want to tack glue this in with CA. Just 1 drop of CA to hold it. And I want that tacked in before I make a permanent seam. Anyway, we did get a nice fit on that. That's going to be hopefully a really nice joint. Now once I know it's clear and that can run that glue seam, and once that kicks off, we get this glued up. That's going to be it for tonight, but we really got a lot done here. Now what's happening though is we're entering the busiest time of my year, where the most shop projects are going to be going on. Plus we're shooting video of building planes, among other things, but it's just, this is the part of the year I live for. Now once that tack dries, and that's just 1 drop, can run a glue seam in there and the gravity will do its thing. And while I'm sleeping tonight, we'll be thinking about, we're going to do the spine. Boy, we got, once it gets to this point, it really gets fun to work on. It really gets, as soon as I have my coffee, I come running down here, make an extra cup of coffee, and I want to work on this. Because it's pretty much for sure, it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot of flying days left. If we sneak one in, great, but right now I'm excited about working on this. And the other thing, when I put a second layer of CA in there, and I just wipe the whole corner with a Q-tip. That makes me a permanent seam. And once all that permanent glue seam is dried up, and it looks like that's drying up nice right now. I like to make sure all the fit, it's nice. All the fits are nice on that. That looks like all we're going to get done tonight. But even that, I don't know, I guess I just get excited about it to the point where I lose track of time. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Now we're coming up on one of my favorite times of year. Halloween! Karen's got the whole house decorated. My God, it's an unbelievably fun time here. And we always look forward to seeing the kids, which obviously they're going to be here at some point in time. And usually the day before Halloween we get everything ready. But I have to admit, one of the things I do from time to time, like today, is when I go down to shop, I think I'll take a little sample. Snickers. This will get me ready to start working on that fuselage again. The first thing I want to do this morning is make sure that I've gone back, because the end of last night was pretty hectic. And we never really can tell when the phone is going to start ringing or not ringing or whatever. President Nixon shows up in a wheelchair or something. But what I want to do now, I want to take that bulkhead and just double check that I've got all the clearances I want in all the corners, so that that bulkhead can go in and out very, very easily and conveniently. And once I've established that, then I can put that bulkhead away for the time being. I won't need it for a while. Now, I spent quite a bit of time getting this exactly right and getting this to be a smooth, relatively nice tight fit, but not one I have to force in. Now at this point, and this is part of the take-apart system that I've used for many years, and I don't know who gets the credit, but I know the Europeans use it, Cosmonato uses it, among other people. Paul Walker uses it. So it can't be that we can't, we could have a long discussion over who invented it, and it doesn't really matter. But one of the things I need is this long wrench now, and this is a long wrench that Paul Winter basically donated this to my cause. I cut up this morning some nice aluminum screws, and what I want to find out now is I want to put this in one screw at a time. Just make sure I can get this in without any interference at all. See, I've got, in other words, I want that footprint as big as possible, but I wouldn't want to have it another 1/8 of an inch over where I can't get the wrench in there conveniently. And of course you do need, from this point on, we need a very long T-handle wrench like this. Now just as an example, the bottom screw, this is one that once we get the tank floor in place, and again I want to make sure all of these screws just go in. I don't even have the washers in place yet, but that's a whole nother issue. Now all the screws are in. Now I can take that bulkhead out, and I'm pretty much done with that bulkhead until we're ready to put the wing in a fuselage. Now one of the most popular things we do on video, and one of the things that a lot of people I think have benefited from, is just, I know on the bombers we've had a lot of call for the videos on how do you make the take apart features. And this is just the basic 101 of the first part of it. Now a couple of do's and don'ts if you're using aluminum screws, and I'll trim these down. I don't need more than maybe a 1/16 of an inch sticking out here. One of the things about aluminum screws that I find, if you're going to tighten these, now because we have to get in there, this will be the tank box eventually. I have found that by using a ball driver on screws to tighten them, in other words, if I put this screw in place and use a ball driver to snug it up, but then to tighten it with anything but a wrench that has a normal end, boy oh boy are you asking for trouble, because what happens when that head strips out, you can't get the screw out, and this screw in here, to get it out, if you strip it, boy, that's going to be a real problem. So that's just one of the things to keep in mind if you're going to do this kind of take apart with aluminum screws. Don't get in the habit of tightening it. You can snug it up, but don't tighten it with a ball end driver. Here's a little thing that I always try to do, is in the course of building a plane, I'm going to wind up with a bunch, starting right now, I'm going to wind up with a bunch of little screws and bolts and motor mount screws. So if I label a little jar, and I've just cut the bottom off a plastic cup or a jar lid, and you would think something like that, it wouldn't be that complicated, but in this shop what happens is, and we're going to have Rich Jacobone with his Stuka here. Brian's going to be coming over for a major repair, to repair the plane he crashed at Middlesex. I've got a lot of things lined up on the schedule that these screws might wind up somewhere where I don't want them to wind up. And once I get the screws the right length and everything, yeah, I hate to just keep cutting them and It's nice if you could stay a little organized, and since I spent a good part of this year, this season, trying to get organized in the shop, I've really found it to pay nice dividends. I'm certainly glad I did it. So that finishes up our first take apart feature, the first little part of this. And again, I never just take for granted that these are going to fit perfectly. And then many times as I pre-fit them and check the holes fit and that the screws go in nice and easy, a lot easier to do it now than when this is all tank floored in and we have bulkheads and things to deal with. This is the #1 step on any take apart plane. And the next thing is every one of these joints I've double and triple CA'd and then wiped with Q-tips. Now see how it leaves a nice little ridge around there? I've done both sides because I don't want any fuel or any oil or anything getting in there over the lifespan of the plane. And this is, if you were to look at what this former does, the torque of the engine, #1, it transmits it back, and the tank floor is going to help us transmit that torque back. And also, now where the wing is going to connect, it's going to actually be connecting the wing to the fuselage. So this part up here, accurate, strong, light. If you can get it any more accurate than that, I don't know how to. I think that's going to really serve us well. And I'm really happy the way this nose section worked out. This is one of the things I really like, is having this kind of pre-curved. It minimizes how much of this material is going to go in there. The way this worked out, rigid and light. So far this fuselage is really coming out. It's exceeding my expectations at every turn of the every time I look at it. I'm just more happy with it than I was the time before. Now the next thing I wanted to do is lay out the spine, and this is really funny in a way. 72 grams for a sheet. This is really not 4-pound wood, trust me. So, and it won't matter because it's nice and straight, and the reality is we're just going to use it for a pattern, so we don't even care. This is just going to be a half pattern. But what I'm going to try to do here is get a center line down here. In fact, what I ought to do, just thinking about things I can do here to make this a little more accurate. Since I'm not looking to save this piece of wood for anything, unless I make a dollhouse or something. I want to get a center line down the wood. First off, I do not want it to spring, that's for sure. Even though this center line will not be real accurate, we don't need it. We don't really need it to be accurate, but we're going to be making up a pattern for the spline, and I want to keep this pattern. Now the two choices are, #1, if you have wood that springs, if the wood springs, what you do is you cut the wood down the middle. You make one, first you make a pattern of course, but then you cut the wood down the middle and reverse it so that this edge is joined to this edge. And what that does, it gets all the tension out of the wood. Then you can trace out the spine, and it ensures it'll stay nice. Well, not in modeling, nothing is like insurance, but in the case of if you have wood that's not going to spring, you can just trace it out. But we don't know until we cut the wood if it's going to spring, until I trace the pattern. So if I trace the pattern on this and it springs, all I'm using this for is for a pattern. If it springs, I've got to just go on to another piece of wood. But I'm hoping that I'll just save me one step, because even though it is real heavy wood, it seems like it's pretty straight. And you don't need sea grain, and you don't need like the best piece of wood in the world for this. So there's what amounts to be the bones of the pattern. Now I got to lay out the fuselage on top of this. Now I really have to credit Les with a lot of what I'm doing on this fuselage is the way we did the Testarossa, and he had a lot of good ideas on that. I really have to thank him for all that help. Okay, so we're looking at 2,450 as our mean shape. Now what I want to try to do is I want to carry this 2,450 right to the end of the flap hinge line. So I know, in other words, I don't want to have any curve in the fuselage between where this is straight and where the control horn is. I want that part to be perfectly straight. So what I need to do is just, for right now, lay out where that flap horn would be and mark at that point in time how many inches I have that are going to be a constant chord. So I know that's where my wing is going to end. And from this point forward, I want this all to be a constant section. Now there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is it makes lining up the wing, this edge doesn't start to have a curve in it. Makes that just a very easy way, a little helpful on doing the alignment too. Plus what I'm trying to do is maintain a little bit more than average width in the fuselage for rigidity, but not like the Testarossa where it's really wide in the back. What I'm going to try to do is put a very gradual taper, but then at the very end taper it down, so that most of the fuselage is just a little bit, now it is already a little bit wider than a typical Cardinal, say, but this will just give me a little bit more aesthetically pleasing curve, I think. And we'll see when we lay it out. But using a spine is a good way to do it. Now what I did, and it seems like a lot of this is overkill until you see the benefit of using a center line, and once you see how accurate you can make things, and I want to get that, now I'm referencing off the edge of the motor mounts, not the fuselage sides. So there's my center. And that lines up my center line on what's going to be our spine pattern. Okay, so I have just a rough idea of where that's going to wind up. And being on center here, now this will be relatively easy because all I need to do is plot this out. This is going to be my hinge line, and we know this is going to be a constant section. So all I need to do is measure from here to here and make sure these two lines are parallel. Then I know I'm off center, the crutch is centered, and I'm going right down the center of the center line. Now I know where the hinge line is, and I know where the fuselage is going to end back here. So this is going to be relatively easy because I'm going to plot the thickness I want at the tail, and then I'm going to start at side. Remember, I only have to do half of this. I just put the other side in here to get an idea of how wide that was going to be. I'm going to plot that curve the way Les used to do it with the 1/4 inch square, and I can fine-tune that and manipulate it endlessly until I'm happy with the shape. Now just by pinning with these John Pothier pins, I can massage this curve infinitely, widen it in the back, make it narrower. I'd like to have that it stays straight from the motor mounts to the flap hinge line, and then instead of tapering right back, I want it to gradually have a bow. Now, part of the reason is I want to have a curve, and it's the curve I'm dependent on for two things. It'll give us more room to inlay that scoop that we intend doing, the side scoop, and also make this a little more rigid. The fact that we're going to have a hole there where the scoop is, we may need a little more rigidity than if we just were going to have a solid fuselage. But this is a good way to lay out any good long gradual curve. It's a good way to do plans, by the way, too. Now it's nice if you have 10 extra hands or you're an octopus or something, but in our case doesn't matter. If you have pins, that'll work. And we only have to have half, because when I put this on the real piece of wood that I'm going to use, I'm going to put this side and then flip it so it's exactly equal. It'll be that thing we love, mirror images. So this should give us very close to the curve that we're looking for. And when I cut this piece out, the trick is going to be, of course, leave the line on. Leave it a little thicker than we really think we need, because we can always dress it off a little. Let's get a little look at what this looks like. Because at this point in time, I get real excited about just seeing these things framed up. And that pretty much looks like what I had in mind. Now the other thing is, this will serve as my pattern. I don't even have to make a pattern, and I only need half. So it gives me a permanent record of how wide that fuselage was in the back, how thin, how narrow, and that's a defining feature of any model. Now on the other end of this, when I made some of the original Cardinals, I made them as thin as possible. They were thinner than profiles. You almost couldn't solder a washer on, but as time went by, I just made it thicker and thicker, and every time I think it's a little bit more rigid, more in keeping with what I'm looking for. And you can see how thin some of these were and how they evolve. It's how they evolve, evolution, that intrigues me a lot about this stuff. And of course the widest one, the Testarossa, was the widest by far. I don't think anybody's ever made a wider fuselage than that, but certainly didn't have any negative aerodynamic effects. And the spits, when you're trying to keep them thin, well, I guess the lesson we learned here is that you can pretty much, that's one of the areas you can be pretty flexible on. Now another thing Les did that I like is he made a top view of the fuselage. Well, I really don't need to do that right now as long as we have that spine. And we have this rough drawing, but keep in mind this, having that scoop in there is going to in some way weaken the fuselage, so we're going to have to figure how to reinforce it. But we know we're going to have nice straight sides, and I know in the end I'm going to make this bottom just a little bit deeper to allow for, if we want to ever use a full-length exhaust system or something that we haven't even thought of yet. I don't want to give up that option if I don't have to. By the way, one of the planes that I liked, Jimmy Casale's Jet, the Columbia, and he certainly had that nice and wide in the front and the back. A good flying plane. Now speaking of something I don't agree with, Casminato sent me plans to, I think, this plane, but I'm not sure which one of his. He does pretty much the same thing. And he only had 2 screws holding the wing in. They were on the plans, there were only 2 screws, and I said, holy mackerel, is that... But you know, these planes didn't have bigger engines. I think this one had a 40, but I'm not sure. But they didn't have the tremendous power that these modern models have. Red Baron had a relatively wide back on the fuselage, I remember that. Now look at Bob Gieske's Nobler, how narrow that is. It's like some of the original Cardinals. So anyway, I think you can do it any way that pleases you. I don't think it's a deal breaker either way. May or may not be a little better performance with a little thickness in the back, but certainly planes on both ends of this have been very competitive. And it's the best of all worlds when you have a free hand to design what makes you happy. And in our case, I wouldn't build something if it didn't make me happy. That's the whole reason for building it. Okay, so we have one half of our spine fully laid out. Now it's relatively easy to do this. I'm going to cut that piece out, trace it out on the piece of wood we intend to use, make sure it's absolutely symmetrical, and make sure the wood doesn't, most of all, that the wood doesn't spring when you put it down the center line. Now that wood didn't spring at all, so we're lucky. We're going to just go ahead and trace this out on the part that actually will become the spine. You know, all we're doing, we put one side on here, trace it out, flip it over, leave the pen line on, and at the end of that we're going to have the spine ready to install. Now it must be our lucky day. Super lucky day. Our spine didn't spring at all. We have the pattern, and that's pretty much ready to install. Now the only problem is we are on the end of this video, and we don't want to be in the middle of installing that when we start the next tape. And we also have a lot of shop work to do today, so we're going to pack it in today. The next step on this is going to be to install the spine, get all that aligned up. And I really hope you've had some good information that you can put in the bank from this tape. There's certainly a few things, when I look back at it, I think there's things you could improve, things that can make it easier for you, things that just make it more fun. And the biggest thing of all, share the tapes with everybody. So we can all get out to the contest or out to the flying field, whatever, and just have a great day. We'll see you on the next video. And if you're not a subscriber, think about it. Could save you a lot of time and money.